Things probably to highlight. One of them is, of course, and this can link to wider issues that we're all very aware of. Perhaps one of them is just simply governance. I think you're all aware of the much more complex, fragmented, multiple levels of governance in all kinds of spheres in the modern world. And one of the key words that perhaps characterises that is partnership. It's no longer new, partnership. They're everywhere in all kinds of spheres, of course, but the rail partnership perhaps is one example of that working, and in fact perhaps surprisingly enduring as well over the years. So in a way it illustrates that sort of focus on partnership. Another, from the railway point of view, I suppose, value of the partnership is just simply providing what I would think of as a relatively local perspective. Given that the railway operators these days have become bigger scale, based in Swindon in the case of First Great Western, they've obviously got local managers, etc. But I think probably if you talk to the people that run the railways, they probably would agree, I think, that they found it valuable to have, through the various connections and meetings and so forth that the rail partnership organises, links, perhaps better links, with local organisations and indeed communities. And there's another good buzzword, isn't it, of the modern era, community. And perhaps another phrase that's worth registering at this point is the whole idea of the community railway and community rail partnerships. They've become much more visible, I think, in the last 10 years nationally. The Devon and Cornwall Rail Partnership would be seen as one of the senior community rail partnerships. Again, very difficult to describe what they are. They vary, but their essence is that they have, in various ways, local involvement, ranging literally from volunteers, people who go and tidy up railway stations because they support the idea of the local railway, through to big organisations like local councils, county councils, etc. But I suppose it's very difficult to pin down precisely if there's such ideas as this. But I think the rail partnership perhaps does illustrate, at least it's one illustration of the community scale of operation, of community partnerships and so forth. What else perhaps I should say? Again, I won't go on too long because I can see you're going to be very cold. Say a bit about Tamar Valley Railway. Tamar Valley Line, when you come up it, you can see that. It's a rather curious railway in some ways, in terms of its railway history. Part main line, part very local line, even from the earliest days. Quite slow, but it provides access to an area which has got very poor road communications, particularly to Plymouth. It also has quite a distinctive characteristic, I think, in that it has its terminus in a fair-sized city. 250,000 people live in Plymouth, and it does provide a railway link to a fairly attractive part of the city's hinterland, public transport link. So perhaps it's quite distinctive in having that actual, and many would hope in the future, perhaps a greater potential role to link a fair-sized city with quite an important area of scenic recreational value, Tamar Valley. And having mentioned that, again, just to confirm, I'm sure many of you will be aware of this already, but the Tamar Valley is an area which is recognised as having quite a lot of significance from a variety of angles as a landscape, or a series of landscapes of relatively high value, as well as an area which has got an interesting past, not least its industrial past. It was an important mining zone, particularly copper, lead mining in the 19th century. Got a range of heritage resources, in other words, in the Tamar Valley. And that's recognised by the way that it is an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's an AONB. In fact, it's the most recent of the country's AONBs, only designated in the middle of the 1990s. So the railway essentially is linking into an AONB. Another point just to make about perhaps emphasising the potential and actual significance of the Tamar Valley is that, as again many of you will know, last year came the formal ratification of the Cornwall and West Devon World Heritage Site, mining heritage, 19th century mining heritage. Its significance on a global scale, in historic terms, was recognised by its designation by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Again, some of you will know all about that kind of stuff probably from other things you've considered. But the point is that the Tamar Valley is the most easterly element of the Cornwall and West Devon World Heritage Site. In fact, there are 10 parts of it stretching right the way down to St Just in the far west of Cornwall. But Tamar Valley, very important in Cornwall and West Devon's mining story. What that means, of course, is that there are things happening in the Tamar Valley as a result of that. World Heritage status, of course, as you may know, it doesn't guarantee funding. There's no sort of big chunk of UN money coming along. But what it does do, I guess, crudely, is it puts an onus on the state, ultimately, and certainly the local state, to support that status by providing funding for conservation and perhaps also for things like interpretation. And so the Tamar Valley, this area here, has seen in the last 2 years a relatively healthy amount of money allocated to it. Not gigantic money, but 6-7 million perhaps on the West Devon side, and several million, some of which of course is coming from what was Objective 1 funding on the Cornwall side. There's lottery money and various other kinds of funding, which is not yet spent. It's underway, but there are a range of different initiatives and suggestions to perhaps make more of the mining area and its status. And there are all sorts of issues that arise there with the balance between conservation and recreation and all these kind of issues. So I put that as a general concept.
The Market Town initiative and stuff like that seemed to have like a peak at the beginning of interest with the partnership, and then it tailed off badly, and then there's issues with keeping the interest going for long enough. When this started, are you struggling to keep people interested, as it's up and running, are you struggling to keep people interested in keeping it running?
Are you thinking of the rail part of it, or the market?
No, for the Market Town initiative, they had issues, that's separate, but they had issues. I was wondering whether you had the same issues with the rail partnership, the fact that keeping people interested over a longer period of time, instead of just the initial setup.
Yeah, I think, what you're pointing at is the real problems with the world of, I suppose, fragmented action and governance that we have. Projects, partnerships, funding streams, different agencies, and sustaining the finance is one of the big issues constantly, but also perhaps sustaining the rather more intangible momentum of individuals, of organisations, of keeping their interest, as you suggest. I think purely the rail partnership, up to now, it's been relatively successful in not having a big problem. There are always question marks: are the councils going to be able to sustain the money? Particularly to allow things to be done as opposed to just the core activity. But I think the rail partnership has been quite fortunate in that respect. In terms of, say, use, so far, most of the branch lines have shown a reasonably healthy rate of growth over traffic. So in that sense, people say that interest hasn't really tailed off. But I think you're pointing at a really big, complex area there. And I know I'm all too aware, actually, of what you're talking about, the Market Coastal Towns Initiative, because I was involved in, curiously, a Market Coastal Towns Initiative here in the Tamar Valley, which hasn't got a market town, actually, but that's another story, and I could go on at some length about that problem, and how you sustain it from a variety of angles, everything from literally keeping funding going after the first couple of years, getting the action plan produced, a few things like that, and no money to actually do anything, through to keeping the interest of individuals who have committed themselves at the outset. So, sorry, I don't know if I've answered that.
No, you have.